Well, for this week's challenge, I'm supposed to review something that's at least 10 years older than I am. Now, being that I'm only 21, I could probably choose one of you judges to review. Making fun of your age is probably not earning me any brownie points. So I'll review something else. How about one of my favorite books, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde? This book came out in 1886, so I'm pretty sure that's at least 10 years older than I am. It was written by Robert Louis Stevenson, which was the same guy that wrote Treasure Island, so you know this guy isn't just a one-hit wonder of the 19th century. Now, something interesting about this book is that it's very familiar in today's culture. Everybody knows what Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is. It's a story of a good guy that takes a potion and turns into an evil guy, and has conflicts because of that. But not too many people have read it, and there's quite a few misconceptions about the book. And I want to clear up some of those misconceptions before I really start into this review. First of all, Mr. Hyde was a brute and was an evil, violent man, but he was no Incredible Hulk. In fact, in the book, he's described as a small person, mostly because the evil side of Jekyll, which Mr. Hyde is the physical embodiment of, was less nurtured and less developed than Mr. Jekyll himself. Everybody in the book that's seen Mr. Hyde in person actually says that they can't really describe what he looks like, except that there's some uneasiness about being with him, and that he looks as if he is disfigured, but they can't put their finger on it. Another bit of misconception is the relationship between Jekyll and Hyde. It's not a good and an evil, a yin and a yang sort of thing. It's actually that Jekyll is just a man who is a little bit of evil and a little bit of good, and that little bit of evil is Mr. Hyde. And lastly, and this is probably most important, is that everybody nowadays knows that Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde are the same person. See, this whole book is actually a mystery. It's not until the very last two chapters of the book that the reveal happens, and we as readers discover that Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde are the same person. And I really feel that it detracts from the reading experience that we're reading it nowadays instead of 100 years ago, and we already know the ending to an otherwise good mystery. Now that we've got that out of the way, though, I can start talking about the book. You see, it's actually a pretty short book, no more than 100 pages, and it's really about one big concept, the duality of man, which is kind of an Englishy term for that people are good and bad at the same time. Now, this idea was by no means a new idea when this book was written, but I'd be hard-pressed to say that this book didn't influence a lot of today's fiction. You know, heroes like Luke Skywalker or Harry Potter are heroes that deal with this inner conflict of finding a balance between the good and the evil within them and trying to choose good over evil. Bad guys like Two-Face is another example of this dual nature. And the flip side of that coin is the necessity of having a double life. Having one life that you present publicly to people and having the other life that's your secret one. And that's pretty much the story of every superhero. Now, since the book is about one main aspect of life, there's not a whole lot of plot that happens. I mean, you can count on one hand all the noteworthy events that happen in this book. There's a girl that's trampled by Mr. Hyde, there's a guy that's killed by Mr. Hyde, there's the ending drama, which I'm not going to spoil, and there's a whole bunch of talking and discussing and hanging out with people. A lot of what happens is simply investigation. It's just trying to observe Jekyll and observe Hyde and trying to figure out what stake Jekyll has in Hyde's life. Now, it can get a little boring in spells, but the book is so small, it just takes a few more pages before you get to the good plot movers. And even with these plot moving points, there's very little that is directly told to the reader until later in the book. Mostly because the people in the book are upstanding Victorian citizens and they don't want to gossip. Which is nice because it builds the suspense throughout the book where you really want to figure out the answer and you're kind of formulating ideas in your head, except like I said, we already know the ending. But it can get a little frustrating that the characters in the book have a lot of information that they don't really talk to each other about. It feels like the mystery can get solved a lot sooner if everybody would just spill their guts. Now, however, there aren't a lot of characters to speak of. The main one is Mr. Utterson, Gabriel Utterson actually, we share a first name. We see the whole book through his eyes. He is the most neutral character you could possibly write. He is dull, unopinionated, generally nice guy, he's a lawyer. Another character is Jekyll's colleague Lanyon, who kind of opposes Jekyll's research into, good and evil, these supernatural things, as being unscientific. He's kind of the voice of reason in the book, and it's actually pretty funny, because he takes deathly ill when something very illogical happens, and I know it's supposed to be a metaphor and stuff, but I can't help but be amused by it. I mean, this guy literally dies of shock in the book, and I mean literally. There's also a couple of maids and butlers and stuff, but they're not very interesting characters. They're just your good, loyal servants, as all Victorian household servants should be. You see, the real focus of this whole book is Jekyll and Hyde. So they're really the only characters that are developed into something interesting. Jekyll, like I said before, is just a man that's very aware of his own inner conflict. There's a person that he intellectually wants to be. There's also this person that he kind of craves to be. But it's the very recognition of this inner conflict that prompts Jekyll to make the potion, which can take the two halves of a man, the good and the evil, and separate them so that there's no more conflict. You can be wholly one or the other. And of course, that wholly evil side is Hyde. He loves himself, he loves to live, and he loves to do whatever the heck he wants to. It's never explicitly stated what that is he wants to do, except for trampling the young girl and killing the politician. But those are big bads and we know that they're wrong. Now, it's actually really interesting how ambiguous the author is with what is morally unacceptable. Now, there's two possible reasons. It might be that at the time of writing, it was very obvious to everybody in this Victorian culture what was not allowed. I feel like today we live with less strict social regulations, so I see a lot of gray areas in the vagueness. Now, I know many people ascribe to the idea that actually Jekyll's main vice is homosexuality, and that in the Victorian society, homosexuals were forced to lead a double life. However, like I said, it's unclear exactly what Jekyll's secret indulgences were. I think leaving that blank is great because it means that we as a reader can fill it in with whatever we want, and it makes it that even 100 years later, this book is still plenty relevant. What a wacky combination. It doesn't have much to speak of in plot or characters, it's a mystery that everybody already knows the end of, and yet the ideas in this are still relevant today. If you think the ideas behind it is interesting, and can appreciate this as basically a giant metaphor, I would highly recommend this book. Not only will it make you a little bit more cultured for reading a classic, but it'll be something that you'll all of a sudden see applicable to all sorts of things, movies, TV, and comic books. Oh, and although you already know that Dr. Jekyll is Mr. Hyde, there's still a twist and some drama in there that I haven't told you guys. But I guess if you want to find that out, you're just gonna have to read the book.